Today we're going to be taking some simple code that's going to spit out JSON so that we can use for an API in the future. Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of DevDrawer. Today we're going to be continuing something that we started on in the last video, where in the last video, as you can see on the screen right now, we created a Vanilla JS only login authentication and validation script. So in the process of creating that, I said that it would be a great idea if we could tie this into an API, so we actually can parse some login information. So this video is going to be taking that concept and actually building out a simple API that we can then use inside of our Vanilla JS for the login authentication part of our login authentication and validation. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We're going to be continuing from the last video just based on something that I said, and I'm actually going to show you how to build out a very simple API. Basically, it's just going to be returning something from a database, converting it to JSON, and it's going to be using object-oriented programming, so you can kind of familiarize yourself with that a little bit. And then I'm also going to show you how to create the tables and add some dummy content information directly from PHP rather than having to do it through the database. So that was a very long-winded explanation of what we're going to be doing today, but if you've stuck it out this far, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and explain my setup a little bit, how I have everything currently set up. I am using WAMP locally just to do the server, so I'm also using WAMP's local database here, and then I have it tied into a folder on my desktop for the actual code. So right now, as you can see from the screen, there's nothing that's currently on the screen, but I'm just letting you know. So WAMP is being used at the server. You don't have to do it that way. You can follow one of my other tutorial videos where I teach you how to build your own virtual server on Linux platform. Or you can also use your own web hosting, whatever it is. But this is specifically for this tutorial. I'm using WAMP just because it's very easy to come about, so most developers can use it. Alright, so I think I've described this project enough. Let's go ahead and start adding some code and getting started. So inside of this folder that I've created, I'm going to create the structure that we're going to use. So the first thing I want to do is create a controllers folder. And inside of that controllers folder, that's where we're going to have like our database connection and all of our classes and stuff like that. And then I also want to create a new file, and this is going to be our htaccess. So our htaccess file, which I've recently done a video on what htaccess is for and what you can do. So I'm not going to go over in detail what it's actually being included in it, but you can watch that video to see if there's anything that you may not understand. Okay, so then we're also going to be using our Autoloader that again I created in another recent video, so you can see why we use that. And then finally we're just going to throw on an index.php page. So now we should have something here. Good. Alright, so let's first start with our Autoloader. And in the autoload, we're just going to create the script. We're going to just create the script that pulls our classes. So let's do PHP. And again, this is a very simple object-oriented autoloader. So let's do function autoload, and then we're going to pass class include, and then we're going to reference our controllers folder. And then that's where all of our classes are going to be declared. So let's see, class, and then .php. So our naming scheme has to be very similar to how we're setting it up right now. And then finally, we're going to use the PHP SPL autoload register. And then we're just going to register our autoload function. And that's it. Okay, so now that we have that done, we can switch over to our index.php, and we're just going to require that file. So require once autoload.php. Okay, so now that is done. So we need to register a database. So let's go ahead and create a database. I'm just going to call it sample API, and let's make it general, and then we're just going to create that. So now I have a database created, but there's no tables, no data or anything inside of it. So what I want to do is use PHP to create the tables, and then also to add information to those tables. So inside of my controllers folder, I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be called db.php, and this is where our database connection information is going to reside. So let's go ahead and create a class. So we're going to call it class db, and then inside of this class, let's go ahead and do our public function. Let's do get connection, because this is where we're going to pass all of that information to. So in order to pass information to this class, this public function, let's create a few variables that'll be used. So we're going to do private, let's see, private host, then that's just going to be localhost, and let's do private, port, and I will get back to that in a minute. So not post, I want to do port. And then we also need to have our username, password, and database. So we're going to do private username, and then root is my WAMP username, and I believe it's not using a password at all because it's not something that's publicly available. So I'm just going to have that blanked out. Then private, let's do database underscore name, and then we just called it, what did we call it? Sample API. Alright, so let's do sample API. Okay, so let's see if this thing is running. It's running on the port 3308. This probably isn't something that you would normally have to worry about, but since I'm using WAMP, and I have localhost reserved to my local private Linux virtual server, so this localhost it has its port number different just because it's WAMP and it's running after my local Linux server is running. So normally you wouldn't have to add the port, but in this instance, in my case, I do. So if you are curious, you can find your port usually by just looking at the server information here, and it'll tell you that MySQL and then the port number. So it's on my local host and then port number 3308. Okay, so let's also create one more variable. This is going to be public because we want it to be usable throughout the rest of the application. So inside of our get connection, we are going to be using PDO. So let's go ahead and set up our PDO connection information. So first thing I want to do is this con is going to be null, and then we're going to do a try catch block. So this con equals new PDO, and then we're going to pass along our PDO connection information. So my SQL host equals, and then this is going to be equal to this host, and then the next line is going to be our port, and then this is going to be equal kind of the same thing. So we're going to do this port, and then we're going to do db name equals this database name. So this database name, and then we're also going to pass in this username and this password. Okay, so now we have our PDO connection. So since we're inside of a try-catch block, let's go ahead and do the catch. So we're going to do catch PDO exception, and then we're just going to create the exception variable. And if it doesn't connect for whatever reason, we're just going to echo out that it can't connect. So let's do database could not be connected. And then let's also display the exception message. So we're going to do exception get message. Okay, so that is our generic connection, and then we just need to return this connection. All right, so that is our generic class DB. Let's see. So what I need to do now is I'm going to create another controller over here, and I'm going to call it setup.php. This controller is going to control the initial setup. So it's something where we're going to like use a variable that flags and says, okay, let's go ahead and run these functions. And then after they're run, you don't really have to run them again. It's basically just like filler content. So you can put in, you can create an entire database from a PHP file. So I'm just going to show you some very simple ways to do that. I don't even know if I'm going to show you all of what I'm doing in it. I'm just going to show you like the generic part of it. And then I might fast forward through the rest of it, but we'll see when we get there. Okay, so we got PHP, and this is going to be class setup. And we want to pass in our private variable con. And then inside of our constructor for this, so we're going to do public function, let's see, construct, C-R-U-C-T, and we're going to be sending over the database information to it, and then we're going to be passing that variable. So this con equals database. So that way we can actually hit the database. So in order to utilize this, let's create something on the index.php that only calls it if we have a variable. So let's do something like if is set, and we're going to do get setup. And then I'm also going to check to see if this get setup is not only if it's set, but if it is equal to true. So that should give us a quick and easy out to be able to set up something. So now we need to call that. And since it's being loaded inside of our autoloader, we don't need to do like an include statement or anything like that because it's already been done that way. So we're going to do setup equals new setup, and then we're passing the database connection information, which we do need to add to our autoload. So inside of this, right after autoload, we're going to do database, so database equals new DB. And then we're going to pass in the database connection. So we're going to do DB equals database get connection, and that should well, yeah, I mean that should work. I was thinking about something else that for some reason it's not allowing me to like show the code, but it's not showing any errors, which means that it's hitting what I want it to. Okay, so now we're passing in our database connection information. Let's create a new function. So let's do public function, and we're going to do create tables. So this is going to create the information and our tables, and then add that information to our tables. So I want to first create a variable, an array. So we're going to do message equals blank, and this is where we're going to showcase, what's happening as it's happening. So we're going to do message, and we're just going to add a new one to it, and this, we're going to start the messaging here. So let's go ahead and do something like setup start it, and then let's just add a break tag after it, and then we want to have the same thing at the very end of it. So we're going to have setup completed. Okay. Okay, so now if I go back to my index, I need to run this connection. So we're going to do, do I need to echo it or print it? I'm probably going to have to print it. So it's a for each. So let's create a variable. We're going to say messages equal setup, and then this is going to be create tables. Don't need to pass anything to it. And then since we're creating an array, we need to do a for each. So for each messages as message, and then we're just going to echo the message with a break tag after it. And that should do it. So now if we come back to our browser over here and we do, what is it? It's setup equals true. Invalid, let's see, create tables, it's not returning anything, I don't believe. Yeah. Alright, so it's not returning anything right now, so let's go ahead and add in our return message, and that should give us the array that it's looking for here. Okay, so now we have our setup started, setup completed, so we just need to do the functionality in between that actually sets up our tables. Okay, so let's add some spacing there, and I'm going to be in this file for a little bit. So we're going to be using PDO to create our statements here. So what I want to do is we're going to create a query, and that query is just going to be a simple create instance. So create table if not exist, and we're going to name it users because I think in the last tutorial we were, the API was going to be based on user authentication. So we're going to create a table called users, and then inside of this table I want to create a few different variables. So let's do an ID, and it's going to be not null. It's going to be an integer, and we're also going to do auto increment. And I also want to have this as a primary key. So primary key ID. Okay, so now we have our ID. It's auto increment. It can't be null. It's an integer. So let's create the other stuff that we need. So we're going to need a username because this is what they use to log in with. So a username, it's going to be a varchar 50. Can't be null. Okay. Let me copy this because we're going to be using this same setup a few times. Let's also pass a first name, last name, and an email address. So first name, last name, email address. So let's change this to email, change this to last name and first name. So let's give them a little bit of room to work with here. So let's do 250 instead of 50. And now let's also add a password here. So we're going to do password. It's going to be a varchar, and we're going to do 500 on this one, and it's not null. And then finally, let's pass an active and make it an integer, not null, have it default at 0. So that should give us the primary information we need for our table. So let's close it out, and we have our query now. So if we come down here, let's go ahead and create our statement. So we're going to do statement equals this con prepare, and then let's run the query. So that should create a table for us. So if we want to validate that, we can do if statement execute if statement execute, and if it's true, we want to add another message that is going to state successfully created users table. I like to use single quotes more than double quotes. Okay, so if we have that, now we should be able to run this. And right now we can see that there is no table. So if we refresh this, it says it successfully created the users. So if we refresh this, now we have a users table. So we have a users table now, which is good. And if we hit the structure, we can see that it contains all the information that we wanted to pass. So now we can also come in here and create information and just add it directly to the database, but I also don't want to do that. I want to have PHP handle it. So one thing that we're going to have to worry about is if we refresh it again, does it create the table again? I don't think it will, because we specifically told it if it doesn't exist, which that part's important, if create table if it doesn't exist. So it shouldn't recreate that table again. So let's go in here and add some users to it. So we currently have where it's creating the users table. So I'm going to create 2 users. So I'm going to use an array, and we're just going to say users equals array, and then inside of this I want to have another array, and we're going to be passing, so we're going to be passing username, and then we're going to be passing fname, and then lname, email, and password. Okay, so that is one of our users. Let's go ahead and fill this out. So let's do the first one as admin, give them test admin, and then let's do admin@example.com, and he's going to have a password of password. Alright, so that will be our first user. I want to create another user now. And our second user, let's set up his username as test, and then they can be test person with a email of test@example. Alright. Let me go ahead and close that out so it, no? Yeah. Close it out so it eliminates that message. I don't want you to be there, I want you to be there. Okay, so now we have our 2 users, and we need to now loop through this user array. So we're going to do for each users as user, and then let's go ahead and create a create another script that adds these users. First thing we need to do is check to see if the users exist, and if they do, then don't do anything. So let's do a statement, and I'm going to call this one statement verify just to keep it separated from the generic statement. And this con, I wonder why my autocorrect is not working right now. So this con should be passing along information there. Well, anyway, let's do select star from users where username equals a question mark, and then that we're going to execute it and pass the information. So we're going to do statement verify execute. So statement verify execute, and then we're just going to pass in an array with the user and username. So basically this is going to just be looking through the database for each user. and it's going to see if that user already exists based on the username. This isn't something you necessarily have to do. I'm just doing it right now to kind of show you how you can prevent from your dummy data from adding multiple times. Because if we didn't have this there, it would essentially run and just add and add and add, even if the usernames already exist, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of a username and a password combination. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and we're executing it. We're passing the username. So let's do an if statement. So we're going to do if statement verify, and we're just going to fetch not equal to true. So if it doesn't exist, we want it to run an insert statement. So now we can do statement equals this con prepare, and then we're going to add in our SQL code here. So insert into users, and we want to insert the username, fname, lname, email, and password, and active. So we want to insert those with the values. We need to have one question mark. So I'm just going to copy and paste. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So now we have the values that we want to have inserted into the statement. So now we have our values that are going to be presented. So we're going to have to do another execute statement down here. So let's do a statement, and then it's going to be execute. Let's see, execute, and then we're also going to again pass an array, and inside of this array we're going to have username, and let me just copy this because a lot of it's going to be the same. So username, let me also break this down so you can see it a little bit easier. There we go. Actually, let me take this and put it after. There we go. So username, we're going to do first name, last name. So let's go ahead and do that. So we got f name and l name. Got our commas. And then we're going to have email. So email, password, and then active. And actually, we don't need to mask anything there because we're not storing any of that. Let's see, password. Okay, so for the password, if we go ahead and run it right now, it's just going to have a text-based password, which we don't want. So we're going to come in here and use the password hash function. So we're going to do password hash, and then this is going to help us create a hash, and then we're just going to use the password default. So you can use bcrypt or any of the other methods that you want to. I'm just going to be using default. It's fine for this. It's not going to go into a real world production environment, but you can just kind of use this as an example. Okay, so now we have where it'll create our users for us, but I also want to be able to display a message after it's done. So in order to do that, we need to create a variable that's going to count for us. So let's come up here, and after the successful user table, let's create a variable I, just have it as 0, and then for each successful statement execute, so I need to wrap this inside of an if statement. So we're going to do if statement execute. We're just going to add 1 to that variable. So now if the statement executes correctly, it's going to go +1, and then I want to create a message that is displayed after. So we got our for each here, so I want to get it outside of that for each loop, and we're just going to do message let's just say inserted the I, which is going to give us a number, rows into users table. Okay. Also, we have if this statement is executed, it's saying it's successful. So let's also come back over here and say that if it's executed and it's not successful, let's also present a message here. So we're going to say failed to create users table. I think that should do it. So if we run through our setup now, so come back over here and we hit refresh, undefined method PDO executes. So on line 49, let's see. So, well, it'd probably help if I spelled execute correctly. Let's try that again. There we go. So successfully created users table, inserted 2 rows into users table. So if we come back over here, browse this, now we have our 2 users. All right, so that's kind of the, I know this was a long way to get to just creating a database, but what you can do is you can use this for any new tables. So if we wanted to create an additional table, we could just prepare it and create it like this, and then run this setup again, and it'll create it for us and add the users and all that kind of stuff. So it's a long way to get to that point, but I wanted to give you another way to do it compared to just creating the database manually. So now we can actually get on with kind of creating the API portion of this. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it, let's say, functions. This is going to, I mean, not a new folder. So delete that. I need to create a new file that's going to be called functions. So inside of this functions.php, it's going to be very simple. It's just going to contain some of the usable functions that we need. So let's do class, so PHP class functions, and let's go ahead and do public, so public function. I wonder why this thing is not auto writing this for me. Construct. There we go. Maybe because I'm not spelling it right. Yeah, it's a big possibility. Okay, so we have our function here. There. Okay. What I want to do is we're going to be using our htaccess file to redirect all traffic to the website to our index.php. So every file is going to be routed through this index.php, and then we're going to create a folder that creates these pages individually that we can then utilize on our simplistic API. So in order to do that, there is some stuff that we need to do in order to get that URL and let it tell us what URL we're supposed to be hitting. So let's do URL equals, I've done this plenty of times, so I'm not going to rewrite this entire thing. So I'm just going to copy and paste from some previous code that I've done that has that information in it. If you want to know more what that's about, basically we're just checking to see if it's an HTTPS server versus an HTTP server, which this one's local, so it'd be HTTP, and then it's basically just going to be parsing out the host and the request URI. And then I'm going to be passing that to a variable that I need to create called this page, and then that's going to be equal to, and then we're just going to parse out that URL. So parse URL, and we just need the path. So we're going to do PHP URL path. And then inside of this, I'm also going to create this public function, or the public variable of page. Okay, so now we have where this is being constructed. It's adding where it needs to go, and I just need to create a function. So public function get page, and we're just going to return this page. Okay, so that's pretty much all we need in our functions right now. So let's go back to our auto load, and we need to add a variable for our functions class. So we're going to do functions equals new functions, and we don't need to pass any database information or anything like that to that page, so we're not going to have to do that, but we need to modify our htaccess file right now. And you can look at some of my previous videos for the htaccess. Essentially, this is going to be taken off the PHP extension, and then it's going to be basically rerouting everything through our index.php. So it's kind of like a simplified MVC that we're creating right now. Alright, so let's see, clicked on the wrong button on my screen. So let's go back over here, and if we don't want to run the setup, let's not run the setup. Now, let's say if we click on, let's say if we want to do an authorization. So we want to do auth, let's see, what do I want to call that? No, let's not do auth. We're going to do /users/auth. So right now, if we hit that, it's not breaking the site, which means our htaccess is working. And if we come over here to our index.php and we say something like echo here, it should echo here because it's being rerouted through our index.php. So this is the direction that we're wanting it to go. So now let's create a reference to this get page, and that's going to give us the page information that we need. So let's do functions get page, and we're just going to add that over here. So let's do echo functions get page, and if we come back to our screen and refresh, we can see that we're on users auth. If we take this and change it to something else, it just echoes it out. It's not breaking anything, which is what we're wanting it to do right now. So yeah, this is doing what we want it to do. But now we want to create an else statement here. So if it's not in setup mode, we want it to run these functions. But only if it's not in setup mode. We don't care if it does all of them with it being in setup mode. We just want it to run that one time. Now, once we get to this part, we're going to be actually using the API. So let's create a page variable, and I want to create a folder over here, and it's going to be in the base URL, and it's going to be called pages. And then inside of this pages, I'm going to create a new folder called users. So that way we can actually hit the pages that we want to hit. And then our URL based on over here, it's users authorization. So inside the users folder, let's go ahead and create a new file called auth.php. So now we have an auth.php, and now we can actually reference the page that we're going to be using based on the routing in our index.php. Okay, so let's go to if file exists, and we created the pages folder, and then we're going to be passing page, which should give us users auth, and then we're going to be adding .php to that. So if it exists, we want it to run a include. So I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to do include, and that should be it. So if it doesn't exist, let's just we're not going to produce anything else here, so let's just do http response code, and we're just going to say it's a 404. So we don't need to have it display anything else. And then just so it doesn't accidentally do something we don't want it to, since it is an API, we're just going to exit out of the code at this point. So right now, if we come over here and refresh this, it works. If we change this to something else, it's going to say, it's a 404. So that's what we want it to do. Now, if we come over to our auth.php, we can type something like hi and refresh, and now we have it being included. in the page that how we want it to be included. Okay, so let's create a controller. So I'm going to do a new file. It's going to be users.php. So inside of this users.php, we're just going to write a class. So just a simple class that uses authentication. Okay, so we're going to do class users, and then inside of this we need to have our construct function. So public function construct, and then we're going to pass that db here, and then we're going to create a variable. This, my typing is really weird today. This this con equals db. Okay, and let's go ahead and create a public variable con. Okay. All right. So now inside of our auto load, let's just go ahead and create another class call, and this is going to be called users, and it's going to go to the users class, and we're going to have to pass in the database information. So let me make sure that that is correct, and that looks good to me. Okay, so for now, that's the only thing we need done in our auto load, and I can also close out of some of these pages to clean it up a little bit. So right now we're only worried about the auth and the users and the index. So let's minimize this so you can see better. And inside of our users function, our users class, we need to set it up so that we can select a specific user based on a username and a password. Okay, so this should be a pretty easy function. So let's do public function auth, and we're going to pass a username and a password to there. And then we're going to be passing this as a JSON object. So let's do JSON equals array, and then let's do our statement equals this con prepare, and then we're going to do select ID, username, fname, lname. So basically we're selecting everything except for active. So we're going to do lname, email, password from users, where username equals a question mark and they're active. And I think let me open it up real quick to see, but I think in our setup the user should be active by default, so we don't have to worry about changing that. If you want to, you can make it where active equals 1, and then have it in your database where they're not actually equal to 1. That's completely up to you. I just made them all default to active. Okay, so now we're selecting everything, and you may be wondering, why in the world are we selecting the password without sending over a password? Because right now we're just looking for a username and it's active. They can type in any username and make sure they're active. Well, that is technically true, but what we're fixing to do is run it through a password verify. In order to run it through a password verify, you need to gather that password. So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So execute, and then we're just going to be passing the username for now. So username, and then we're going to do a while loop. So while row equals statement fetch, and then we only want to fetch as an associate array, because if we do fetch all by itself, it also spits out like keys. We don't care about all of that. We just want it to fetch or spit out a associative array. So we're going to do PDO fetch a sock for associate. Okay. So we're going to do a while loop, and then this is where we're going to come in and verify the password. So we're going to do if, and this is a PHP function, so if password, so password verify, and then we're going to be passing the password that we're gathering from our function, and then row password. So once it's here and it verifies that it's the password is correct with the hash, then it will then allow it to pull back everything else. If not, then it just returns a false, or we'll make it return a false. Okay, so we're going to have JSON ID equals row ID. And if we weren't passing the password inside of our select statement, I would just do like JSON equals row, and that would be sufficient. But since we're actually comparing it to a password, I don't want that password field to bleed over into any kind of thing that can be read by humans. So we're just going to manually do this part. So we need ID, username, fname, lname, email. Okay, so we got ID, username. Then I'm just going to paste this to fname, lname, and then email, and then let's come back up here and fix this and make it username. Okay, so now we're gathering everything if the password has been converted successfully. So let's do return JSON encode, and we're just going to encode our JSON array, and otherwise we're just going to return false. So if anything fails, if it doesn't execute it, whatever it is, it's just going to return false, which will give us something that we can use inside of our authorization page. So let's open this back up and go back to our auth page. And I don't think it's actually going to do anything right now. Okay, so there's a few things that we need to do. First thing is I'm just going to set up some dummy data. We're actually going to be pulling this from an AJAX call, which I think I'm going to get into in the next tutorial. This tutorial is just setting up the API, which we're almost done with. But I think in the next tutorial, I'm actually going to show you that this is how we're going to send it from our validation and authentication JavaScript. This is what it's going to get pushed out to here. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and write something that displays on the screen here. So let's first do username equals admin, because I know that is one of them. And then I'm going to do password equals password. So this is the variables that would actually be coming over from the JavaScript call. So right now we're just going to default them to this. Alright, so let's do HTTP response code. We're going to set it up as a 200 response code first, just so that it works. And then after everything, I want to exit, just so it doesn't bleed over into anything else. Okay, so if the username and password are set, which in this case they will always be set, but in the future they will not. If they are set, then we're going to create a variable called JSON, and it's going to be equal to users authenticate, and we're going to be passing the username and the password. So let's see, password there. And if the JSON exists, we want to echo the JSON. So we're just going to echo our JSON, because that's going to be the visible portion of this API, is so that you can see what kind of information is being provided. And it's also going to work whenever we go to use the JavaScript to be able to pull it down. Okay, so if the JSON exists, that means that it validated, everything's working as expected. If it doesn't exist, let's pass in a HTTP response code of 400, saying that it's basically something went wrong, but it's not missing. So we got a 400 code, and let's do echo. We're going to do JSON encode, and let's just create an array So the first part could be error, and then this is going to be true, and then the second part is going to be message, and let's just put the message as user account not found. And this will be information that can be used by the script. So if it pulls back an error is true, we can flag it to display an error message or something like that. But for right now, it's it's just going to be inside of the browser. Okay, so now I think that will be good for that. Let's also do an else statement here, and we're going to add in. We're not going to pass a 400 code. We're going to keep the 200 code on this. So if the username and password are blank, we still want it to return something. We just want it to return an error. And we want them to know that it is connecting to the API so that it's not going to be freaking them out, making them think that there's a 404 happening. Because it's technically not. But we do need to have something on here that says something like you are missing information or something like that. So let's do you are missing information. Okay. Let's test it out. So I think we should be able to refresh here, and we can see that it's pulling what it should be. And if we inspect this and we go over to our network tab, and let's see, reload, we got a authorization of 200 happening, so that's what we're wanting there. But if I come over here and I change this to password 2 and we refresh, it says user account not found, and then we get that 400 error message. So that is what we're looking for. Now if we take away one of these, it should still work, but it should display the message you are missing information. So you are missing information, but it's still returning a 200. Okay, so the API part of our API is spitting out the code that we want it to. Let's change this to test and see if it pulls back the other information as well. So test person. Okay, all right, so that is what I wanted to see. And I believe this is just JSON code. Yeah, it's just written out as JSON. All right, so let's go back and put this at admin, and let me look over my notes to see if I am missing anything. I don't think so. So we got our database connection set up to install it, our users, autoload. Yep. So I think that's it. So this is where I'm going to end this video, because I think this video is probably an hour long already. So I'm going to end it now, and in the next video that I do, I'm going to show you how to take this connection that we have here and parse it through Google or Vanilla JavaScript's fetch request. And I'm going to show you how to take the information from this or any other API and use it against the validation and authentication script that we have already created, and make it where it actually stores information from a database. So kind of like finishing off the tutorial that I did last week or the last time. This is the data part of the connection, and next week it'll probably be a short video, but I'm going to show you how to pull it from the data and use what we already have to validate it, and use JavaScript's fetch abilities to be able to pull it. So I hope that you liked everything that you saw. It's going to be a fun project, and it's very versatile. So right now, I mean, there's not really anything on this that is like it's not something that's specifically limited to what we're doing for that one application. I mean, you can take what we've built here and use it on pretty much any kind of API that you want to build. You can create additional authentication methods. You can create something, maybe in the next video we'll use some tokenization and be able to pass that to here in order to be able to pass it back to the JavaScript, stuff like that. So there's some a lot of really cool things that you can do with this, and you can look through some of my other videos about creating and modifying APIs and stuff like that, and kind of see what you can do with it. But this is like the very simple base framework of what you would need in order to start creating your own API that's then accessible through a third-party application or JavaScript or whatever it is. So again, I hope you liked the video. It's something that's definitely definitely good to know. So I think that's going to be it for now. If you did like this video, give me a thumbs up and let me know that you liked it. If you've made it this far and you're not a subscriber and you want to see other videos like this, or you want to see how this one concludes, subscribe to the channel and you'll be notified whenever I put up a new video, which I try to do at least once a week. But I think for now that's going to do it for this tutorial. I appreciate you watching, and I will talk to you later.